Hello, I'm Hazel, and I'd like to share my story about the time I finally stood up to my high school bully after graduating. My experience with bullying was sadly typical. Every day, I endured relentless torment, and despite my efforts to evade it, my tormentors always managed to find a way to make my life miserable. They taunted me, humiliated me in front of my peers, coerced me into running errands for them, and subjected me to various forms of humiliation. It seemed like there was no end to their cruelty. What made my situation particularly challenging was that I couldn't turn to my teachers for help because my main bully happened to be one of my teachers, Miss Morgan. She was incredibly popular among both the staff and students, and whenever I attempted to voice my complaints, I ended up looking like the villain. Miss Morgan was a model of politeness, always wearing a smile, assisting students, and supporting other teachers with their lessons. To everyone else, she was known as Rivera, but to me, she was Miss Morgan. Rivera had the entire school wrapped around her finger, and my fellow students often responded to my grievances with disbelief. "How could you say that about Rivera?" was a common refrain. Unfortunately, the principal wasn't any more helpful. Whenever I sought his assistance, he dismissed my concerns with statements like, "We've never had a complaint. Perhaps you're misunderstanding the situation." I knew I wasn't misunderstanding anything, but each time he intervened, the situation only grew worse. He would emerge from his discussions with her enchanted, and I would face repercussions. Officially, I held the title of her assistant, a designation she bestowed upon me after my previous complaints proved ineffective. Unofficially, however, I was her servant. She would task me with collecting class worksheets, which I was then expected to complete. If I made an error, she'd berate me, using harsh language and flinging the papers to the floor. I would dutifully pick them up and start over. At one point, I attempted to ignore her, but in retaliation, she deliberately graded my tests with failing marks, littering them with S. I attempted to comply with her demands, but it seemed that nothing I did was ever good enough. The situation became so dire that the mere mention of my name would send shivers down my spine, as I dreaded what she would demand of me next. And when she noticed my fear, it seemed to bring her a sadistic pleasure. She was so revered by everyone around me that I began to feel as if the entire school was conspiring against me. The torment was relentless, an unending nightmare from which there was no escape. So when graduation day finally arrived, I was overwhelmed with joy. It marked the long-awaited end to the suffering I had endured throughout my high school years, a chance to break free and move forward. Yet, as I sat there, waiting for my name to be called, I could sense something stirring within me. When the principal announced my name, I squirmed in my seat, nervously scanning the crowd to see if she was there. Graduation, a day that should have been a momentous occasion, was tainted by the lingering grip Miss Morgan had on my mind. Her influence weighed heavily upon me, and I realized I couldn't allow her to continue having power over my life. I knew that as long as I permitted her to control me, I would never find happiness. So, driven by a determination to free myself from her grasp, I hatched a plan for revenge. After the graduation ceremony, I visited a nearby store and purchased numerous palm-sized alarms activated by Bluetooth technology. Over the years, she had frequently sent me on personal errands, so I was aware of where she lived, and I knew about the spare key hidden behind her back door. I waited for Miss Morgan and her husband to leave their house, then slipped inside. I strategically planted the alarms throughout her home, both upstairs and downstairs, in the bedroom and the kitchen. No corner was overlooked. That night, I parked my car not far from their residence and watched as they retired for the evening. I accessed the app on my phone and activated the first alarm. As I waited, a sense of satisfaction washed over me, and I couldn't help but laugh as 5 minutes passed, and the alarms ceased their blaring. It was a brief yet exhilarating 5 minutes, but it marked the beginning of my liberation from her torment. That night, I experienced a peaceful and undisturbed sleep for the first time in what felt like an eternity. It was as though I had reclaimed my life, no longer under her control. Night after night, I observed her restless slumber, lights flickering on and off, the sensor on my app indicating its eventual deactivation after minutes of persistence. Each night's triumph brought a profound sense of satisfaction, often punctuated by my own hysterical laughter. It was immensely gratifying to finally have the upper hand over Miss Morgan after enduring so much at her hands. One morning, my curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to witness their reactions firsthand. I activated one of the alarms I had strategically placed in the kitchen early in the morning. I tiptoed around to the back of the house and peeked through a window, eager to see their faces when they managed to silence the alarm. A minute passed before Miss Morgan burst into the kitchen, flinging open cupboards in search of the source. She eventually located the alarm and forcefully pressed the button to deactivate it. It was a struggle to suppress my laughter, but seeing the irritation on her face and how many times she kept pounding the button, even after the alarm had ceased, brought a smile to my lips. My plan was not only working, it was exceeding my wildest expectations. A strong desire to reveal myself to Miss Morgan and let her know that I was the one behind her nightly disruptions welled up inside me. I yearned to witness her shock as she saw my face standing there, holding the alarm in my hand. However, I resisted the urge and turned away from the window, opting to pull out my phone instead. Everything was proceeding perfectly, so I decided to trigger another alarm. The thought of her reaction, perhaps similar to how I had felt when she had called my name in frustration, filled me with immense satisfaction. Yet, just as I was about to press the button, I heard murmurs from inside. Glancing back through the window, I saw Miss Morgan in tears. Initially, I felt indifferent, believing that she deserved a taste of the pain I had endured for so long. However, her husband descended the stairs, and his furious yelling and accusations directed at her changed the dynamics of the situation entirely. He laid blame on her for everything, even going so far as to accuse her of deliberately triggering the alarms herself. She vehemently denied it, and their heated argument erupted, but he refused to relent. His angry words echoed in my ears, reminiscent of the hurtful things she had often said to me. "How could you be so foolish? You know I have to work early in the morning, and now you're playing these absurd games? You're worthless. You better find every single alarm before I return today." He forcefully pushed past her and stormed out of the house, swiftly driving away. I stood there in shock, torn between feeling sorry for her and making my exit. However, another voice suddenly joined the chaos, a woman's voice. I peered through the window and saw an older woman berating Miss Morgan with piercing, shrill accusations. "You are not the woman my son deserves," the old woman shrieked. "We are both miserable because of you. Get out and leave us alone." I couldn't believe my eyes. The old woman looked utterly terrifying, and I watched as Miss Morgan paused for a moment before shouting, "Hazel." My heart froze, and my entire body went numb. She had spotted me, but then she continued speaking. "Just because you're my mother-in-law doesn't mean you can speak to me that way in my own home." It was a shocking revelation. Her mother-in-law had the same name as me. Suddenly, everything started falling into place. After enduring years of torment from Miss Morgan, it had been difficult for me to muster any sympathy for her. However, witnessing this scene with my own eyes changed my perspective. She'd have been subjecting me to what she herself was enduring, her way of finding some release from her own suffering. I had always wondered why she had singled me out for her cruelty, and now it became clear. I felt sorry for what she was going through, even though I harbored anger about her taking out her frustrations on me for so long. Upon reflection, I realized that I didn't want to become like her, a miserable person who sought solace by making someone else's life miserable. That just wasn't in my nature, and I didn't want to follow her path. I believed that two wrongs didn't make a right. So I wrote a letter detailing the locations of the remaining alarms and slipped it under her door. With that, I drove away from her house and never looked back. It made me reflect on the question she had asked at the end. Have you ever been teased by your teacher?